Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific podcast. I'm Anindita Sharma, your host for today's episode. I'm excited to launch this space for conversation, learnings, and connection. EEAP brings together people who care about using evidence for better energy policies and programs, and that means hearing from the experts, innovators, and change makers from around the world. Whether you're deep in this field or just curious, I'm glad that you are here. Our guest today is Dr. Edward Alvine, one of the world's most respected voices in energy evaluation. If you've ever wondered who can tell whether billion-dollar energy programs make a real difference, the answer might be Ed. His career spans decades and continents, from evaluating lighting programs in South Africa and Peru to shaping climate strategies in California to building communities of energy evaluators in Asia and Europe. Along the way, he has been part of a Nobel Peace Prize winning IPCC team, authored numerous studies, and mentored the next generation of evaluators. Wow. Today, we will hear the stories, lessons, and insights from Ed's remarkable journey. Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Hi there. Glad to be here, particularly the first episode. Thank you.
Who are you, and what do you do?
Well, right now, as of today, what's called an affiliate of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where I worked my whole career. That means I retired and came back, and I'm still associated with the lab. But as you can tell, I'm still involved in evaluation issues, particularly in the Asia Pacific region.
Tell us a little bit more about your path to getting here, Ed. What brought you to this field? What sparked your interest? What influenced you?
Well, there's many things that influence me, and it is not a linear process. But I would say, particularly when I went to graduate school in University of California at Davis in the early 1970s, I got involved in environmental issues. And one of my first projects was actually looking at a water controversy on the coast of California. It was the first environmental battle along the coast, dealing with dredging of a river and actually transporting the material, the gravel from that river to build the tunnel that our rapid transit BART was using to go from San Francisco to the Bay Area. And a local person there in this community of Jenner was uh, created a neighborhood organization, basically community organization, to stop it because it was an environmental sensitive habitat. So I got involved in how people were basically organizing to stop something over something they clearly thought was important. And that carried over to my next project. That was for a master's project. And as part of my PhD, I was looking at the city of Davis was the first community in the US that had an energy conservation building code. And Davis then built some other aspects to that law dealing with renewable energy, wastewater, water conservation, and so on. So, how does a city do that? And I interviewed people. So, a lot of that was my sort of evaluation fundamentals from a qualitative point of view in terms of interviewing people. And that sort of led to another part of my thesis in looking at the solar energy movement and who are the people at the time as part of this Northern California Solar Energy Association. Are they deviants? What are they doing? It's very strange people. Well, it turns out I did surveys and quantitative analysis, again, analyzing survey data, but on a larger field, and finding out no, they were not deviants. They were normal people, highly educated, and very interested in seeing solar energy promoted. So that's where, from both of those experiences, I got involved in energy efficiency and solar energy. And then my first job, and again, only job, was right after graduate school at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. and we got involved in evaluation related activities. And I was the evaluator, there was nobody else there. And then that led to me being involved in a larger community of evaluators in the United States. And there was a conference that I went to in the early 1980s for the International Energy Program Evaluation Conference. And that's where I developed a whole network and community of evaluators, which I really appreciated and continued for my whole career.
Listeners may know that around the same time, Dr. Art Rosenfeld, often called the father of energy efficiency, was pushing for appliance standards and conservation in California. His work helped flatten the state's electricity growth curve, famously called the Rosenfeld effect. This shift was happening as California debated a massive nuclear expansion that never materialized. Ed's story sits right in that turning point. You talked about your interest in understanding why people were looking into solar energy. What triggered your curiosity to know?
Um, Mainly, it was an interest in not the technology itself, but the behavioral aspect and the demographics as well. But what made some people interested in solar energy and others weren't? And was there something about them that distinguished them from other people? And it turns out no. But that sort of led to my interest in process evaluation and why people participate or don't participate in this case, energy efficiency programs, which is what I got interested in. And and then the flip side of that, how do we increase sort of either solar energy or energy efficiency in the United States at the time? And what do programs offer that will attract people to participate in the programs and either get educated or take advantage of incentives at the times? And that's where I got involved also with the utility companies, because the utilities at that time in the early 70s were the one who had funds to try to promote energy efficiency.
So, for the listener, evaluation in energy means looking at both people's choices, which is the behavior side, and the structures around them, which are the policy and the incentives. But if we step back a little, what does it mean to a layman when we say evaluation of energy? I think a lot of people want to understand or have a keen interest in solar energy or renewables or environment, etc. But when we say energy evaluation, what do we mean?
And so when you try to educate people about evaluation, I focus on the question is what works and what doesn't. And then when you start there, then what can be improved? So are certain programs good or not? And how do you do that? Well, you need to rely on good data and analysis. And so for an evaluator, the evaluator in the early days was really focusing on two types of evaluation, impact and process. And the impact is the one that policymakers are really leading, are interested in. How much energy has been saved, for example, is the key question for energy efficiency. So if you have an energy efficiency program dealing with buildings, whether it's a residential building or commercial building or even an industrial building, and energy efficiency is going on in there, you want to know how much energy use that building was used before the intervention and how much energy was used after the intervention. And that's the energy savings. And then you can use that and go back to the policymakers and say, well, you know, you were considering building these power plants to meet a certain energy demand, but that energy demand is not needed now because we're saving energy. You don't have to build an expensive power plant. And that's got their interest as well. And in fact, in California, the initial goal was building a series of nuclear power plants along the coast of California, from the border of Oregon all the way to the border of Mexico. And some key people, including one of my colleagues who's no longer here, Art Rosenfeld at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, was leading that effort. And I worked with him and others at the lab to show that energy efficiency works And evaluation has an important uh, role to play in the storyline I just talked about.
That's fascinating. And the historical policy ideas and research that's been done as well. And I want to go back to a couple of things and just clarify for the listener. So you brought up impact and process evaluation. And you said for impact evaluation, it is seeing the so what of the policies that were put in place. What do you do for a process evaluation? And are you also involved in those?
Yes, in fact, although initially involved more on the impact side and over time more in the process side, the process is again, harping back to some of the things I talked about before, is how do you go from point A to point B? So, how do you get people interested in? So, you have to go back and interview people to see what made them more interested in energy efficiency or not. And then you then find out what worked and what didn't. What were the problems? And this is when you interview people again on the process side. What were the problems they encountered? Can things be corrected or improved going forward? So then things can operate more smoothly and more cost effectively. Because evaluators are interested not only in the cost of what goes on in either a project or the implementation of a project, but also in the cost of the evaluation. You don't want to have a very expensive evaluation unless it's needed, but over time you want to reduce the costs. And you learn that through process evaluation, through these interviews and collecting data as well. So they go hand in hand. And what we try to do over the years is, and it doesn't always work for various reasons, but if you're going to do both impact evaluation process, try to do it at the same time rather than years apart.
And as all evaluators, impact evaluation is about the so what changed, while process evaluation is about the how. How did people engage? What worked smoothly? What got in the way? I have two questions just based on your response. The first is the core idea about people's behavior. Can we come back to that for a moment, Ed? Here's where I am not so clear. Are these behaviors just people's, are these explained by something? Is it purely an incentive structure? What has been your experience of seeing so many of these projects and policies?
Right. So again, things have changed or evolved over time, but in the early on, people were influenced by economists, and economists were having an important role to play in whether programs can go forward or not. Are they cost effective is the question. So you focus on the cost. And so when you look at the behavior, people were saying, well, are people's behavior being influenced simply by cost? And if it's too costly, they won't invest in energy efficiency. But how do we reduce costs? But over time, we realized cost was one important factor, but not the ultimate factor. There were things what we call non-cost factors and also non-energy factors. So one example of that would be comfort. Through an energy efficiency, say, retrofit project, it turns out that people were more comfortable. They were living in rooms, either apartments or homes, and even commercial buildings where basically there was very little insulation and they could feel the outside temperatures, whether it's cold or very hot. But after an energy efficiency retrofit project, they realized, hey, this works, this is comfortable, nothing to do with cost. So then the program people understood this and they from their work as well. And so when they're promoting energy efficiency efforts, they were promoting not only how cost effective it is for them, but also comfort. And that leads to other non energy benefits, such as health. People got less sick because you know they were living in an environment where they didn't have to either put on the air conditioner or heater all the time. And sometimes they couldn't do it, particularly, this segues into low income people. So energy efficiency can help all income levels, but the low income level needed important thrust as well.
Here, Ed emphasized that behavior is complex and not easily explained simply by demographics, reinforcing why process evaluation is so important for evaluations. In all the projects you've seen, does any stand out to you as, or in any way?
No specific projects because they do work. And that, I guess, it's more of a general impression that energy efficiency works in lots of different climates, lots of different demographics, and lots of different countries. So I can go from California and work with people in Alabama, work with people in Michigan, work with people in the Northwest and the Northeast, and we have the same language. And the same thing we mentioned earlier, the organization I help work with, Internet IEPEC, it came naturally, but people from Europe said, well, we'd like to have the same or similar organization. They weren't come, it's an international group, but for various reasons, people couldn't afford to come over to the US for our conference. So we decided to have one in Europe, and it's been a big hit there. No matter what the language is and interest, people understood energy efficiency. They understood what evaluation was, what the concept was, why it's important. And now in Asia Pacific, the people we've met and across the board, whether it's China, Vietnam, Indonesia, etc., they understand the basic concepts and meeting these people. So for me, over time, the projects themselves didn't stand out in particular. I mean, they were really beneficial and they provided great savings. But for me, it's the language and the people, the network, the community that for me inspired me to continue what I'm doing because they had the same interests, understood the benefits, and were eager and excited to do this.
We will talk a bit about the community, particularly EEAP, in a moment. I want to pick up on something you said about people understanding something in common. Do you see that understanding of the importance of the field the same way in the future? And do you think more needs to be done to make energy evaluation or the understanding and involvement of energy policy program better?
Well, this year has been particularly difficult and challenging. I think we were on a good path before in the United States with our new administration that people were learning lessons on what to do, what not to do. And if you, again, take a step back, um, particularly my experience was initially in California, where the utilities uh, along with the California Public Utilities Commission, the regulator of the commission, and the California Energy Commission, which promoted research, were all on board in the same wavelength and supported, provided incentives. And then this over time carried forward in the US. And again, most of it was on energy and the energy savings and efficiency and evaluation of that, but it broadened over time to include non-energy benefits. And what really exploded, and that's why I got involved, was with climate change and environmental issues. And then even more recently, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, that has resonated around the world and people are focusing on that. And energy efficiency is one element of that as well. So there's really momentum and expanding. But I see in the last year, and I might be biased because what's going on in the US, but I have a feeling in other countries as well, they're sort of taking a step back. Not all, but in the public sector. And I'm afraid the message that's coming out now in the last year is not what should be going on in the rest of the world. And I'm afraid of fossil fuels, for example, being the answer to the energy problem rather than renewable energy and energy efficiency. But evaluation really has that critical role. People understand it, and we hope to expand and build on that in the years to come.
Recent IEA data shows that energy efficiency could deliver more than 40% of the needed emissions reductions by 2030, which is a powerful counter to the argument for more fossil fuels. And you mentioned this community and people aligned behind a common cause. That brings the discussion to EEAP, the organization we are both affiliated with at the moment. You started it. What motivated you then to do so, and what do you hope EEAP's contributions would be in the field or outside?
Right. So this is, been going on for 8 or 9 years now in Asia Pacific. And the hope for EEAP was to bring together evaluators, uh, focusing on energy efficiency and renewable energy. And again, taking a step back, in the US, we have many states, and people are active in each state, and they often focus on their state needs. In the federal government, there were, with the US Department of Energy in particular, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, a national vision of what needed to be done. And evaluators could operate at that level. But the first organization, IEPEC, tried to bring the US people from all the different states because they were really acting, many of them, in isolation from each other. So bringing them together in an organization was very beneficial. And in fact, you've heard the phrase hallway conversations. The same thing with hallway conversations, not only at work, but at conferences. So you hear talks, but then you can go outside of the talks and meet with people, have a meal, or have coffee with them or whatever, and talk about, well, what are you doing? How does it relate to what I'm doing? We wanted that experience to go to Europe, which happened, and now Asia Pacific. Because when you think of these countries, a lot of the people say in Indonesia, they rarely go out of Indonesia, or in Vietnam, they're in Vietnam. So we wanted to provide a forum where they could come together, and it may be just a few people in each of these countries. These aren't huge conferences where you hear about 1,000 people. It's much smaller, but it provides an opportunity for them to network, find out that, oh yeah, we're working on a similar project. What are your issues? What are your barriers? How did you solve this or that? That really provides enlightenment and also an eagerness to support an organization like EEAP to continue to strengthen what they're doing in their country, as well as strengthen the entire network. And it can be, hopefully over time we can provide more educational opportunities and for more people to come together. So the key is really to build up that community, have the networking opportunities like webinars and workshops and a conference, and continue that. But it's difficult, it's very challenging. And what we've in each of the areas also, one of the main barriers to this organization process is fundraising. And it's been the most difficult in the Asia Pacific. And I'm not, well, I can guess why that is, but it was difficult in the US until people stepped up and so on. And I'm hoping for EEAP, it'll be easier to support their efforts over time, but it needs work. And we've been working on that.
And EEAP does really good webinars and discussions. So absolutely encourage our listeners to go and find those. And Ed leads quite a few of those. So please do listen to them when you have a moment to. Now, when we talk about the challenges, Ed, it reminds me that more needs to be done in the future. So if you look ahead to the next 3 years, even five seems too long these days, but let's say three, what are the key challenges or things that we need to prepare for? And perhaps you could take the EEAP hat on for this and say what should be in place for the field in the next 3 to 5 years.
Sure. Well, what I just mentioned earlier, fundraising, if we can have a continuous with continual source of funds, then we can do a lot more. Everything is voluntary right now, including myself and yourself and now Nazir and others. So we would like to have a steady stream of income would be great. What will we do with that? Well, instead of having a conference, first more conferences, but instead of every 2 years, we could have an annual conference. Or, and I think this is where ideally we, we should be having a meeting in each of the countries in the Asia Pacific region. That one of the challenges, not only for EEAP, but for the attendees, is the cost of going to a conference. Now, if something was more local, so they could get on a bus or a train rather than a plane, and either come for the day or spend one night or so, the expenses would be reduced and they would come. And so I would say spatially have something closer again in each country, and temporally have something often rather than every 2 years, maybe a yearly meeting. And then I guess the third thing is I know there is a need for training and education. It'd be great to have the universities come on board. Now, they do work on evaluation, and we have a directory of colleges and universities in the Asia Pacific region, a directory on our website that offers these classes. But it would be great to have them on board as well and focusing on energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. Obviously, evaluation is being done in all sorts of different topical areas like health, education, criminal justice, etc. Uh, but we really need to have more focusing on the energy field. And I think to some neglect, that's what's happened. And so EEAP can play a really important role in focusing, say, a workshop on evaluating energy projects in each of those countries. And we would work with locals. In some cases, we would bring in international people who, consultants basically, who do this for a living. And with a source of income we have, we could at least pay for their transportation logistics and hotels, et cetera, and they would volunteer their services. That was the model we used. And APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Community, helped us in that respect in the beginning, but we need more of that. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does, and it raises some more. Um, let's talk a bit about the conference. And I completely understand that the localization of conferences is wonderful for anyone who cannot travel far um, to meet others. But let's deep dive a little more into this, Ed. You said earlier that you've benefited greatly from knowing people in the field. Um, maybe you could talk a little bit about 2 or 3 things that you have gained from being in these rooms with people that are thinking the same things or
Mm-hmm.
differently perhaps, and how the EEAP conferences could offer that to
Right,
our region.
right. There are many ways of looking at this, but one is, again, not surprisingly, it's the topics and the people. So when you go to a conference, you don't know everything and you learn a lot about different topics and about different projects. And then you realize, oh, we could do that here. This was, say, in the US, they were doing it in Washington. Well, we could do this in California. So from a topical interest, that's what you learn from a conference, things you didn't know about and you picked up and say, hey, we could do that. Then, of course, the other side associated with that, the people. Oh, this person is studying something similar. And not only can we study that, but maybe we can work together. And in many cases, for me, I've co authored papers with people I met through conferences because they had similar interests. And we said we should do something together. They had a different experience, say in Michigan for one of my friends, and mine in California. So those are two things that then going fast forward to energy evaluation Asia Pacific, and I did learn there are programs, say in Indonesia, or projects people were working on that people in Thailand didn't know, and they can work together. And there's interest in people working in other cultures because there are cultural issues as well in working together and on the projects themselves. So conferences bring the people together. And again, there's the formal conference where there are talks and sessions, and then there's the informal part of the conference. Again, I mentioned that with meals or breaks. Often the conferences will have a either formally or informally a networking time period, maybe a half hour between the formal sessions. People get coffee and tea and whatever, and then you meet with people. Maybe you heard somebody in the morning and the person's drinking tea, and you go up to them and you talk to them and say, "Oh, I have a project like that," and that's how it works. So both the formal and informal.
That spirit of hallway conversations is exactly what EEAP is building, creating a space for Asia Pacific evaluators to connect and learn from each other. Ed, I want to switch a bit the discussion, and we can come back to EAP again in the end. For the moment, I want to get your insights about policymakers, and in this moment, what are what should they be doing? What should they be thinking about as it comes to energy policy?
Right. Yeah, and as you know, I have had a long experience with dealing with policymakers. And in the beginning, it was negative. And the reason was, and now I'm in their age group, but I can confess, um, they had been working in these organizations, and these organizations often were utility companies, but also state government and federal government. And it's hard to change people's opinions if they've been there for many years. But what really happened is a new generation entering into the leadership who were interested in change and interested in making this a better world. And energy efficiency, renewable energy was a conduit to that. And they were more open and receptive to new ideas. And they were also very receptive to data, empirical data, to support your case. And so evaluators had a really critical role to play in providing that good empirical database and getting their interest. So that's number one. So they were receptive. It worked both ways. Uh, but the evaluators, over time, we learn a lot. And one of the things we learned is, we could do a great study, and I mentioned this again earlier, a 200-page report with great data, but the policymakers will not read that. Not that they're against it, and a few do, but very few. But if you can distill that to either 5 pages or what we call the elevator speech, you're trapped in with a policymaker on the elevator, you're on the ground floor, you're going to the eighth floor. What are you going to tell them to convince them, listen to my findings from the evaluation? So the evaluators really have to take the burden on distilling what they have to something that's meaningful and useful for policymakers. Otherwise, they'll just fall asleep and go on to the next topic. So it works both ways, and that's why, again, earlier, evaluators need to work with the policymakers, not at the end of the evaluation, but at the beginning. See what are their interests and making sure when the evaluation is being conducted, you're going to be answering some of their questions.
Think of it as an elevator pitch, but for evaluators. A minute to convince a policymaker why your findings matter. That is a skill we don't often talk about, but it is critical. I think we should talk about evaluators a little more because one part of our mandate also is to work with evaluators and perhaps build that community. What should they be doing? In particular, as it comes to energy evaluation, what should they be doing? Whether they understand the field very well or are new to it.
It's important for evaluators uh, to realize that there are these different dimensions. And often evaluators work in their own silos. So the evaluators of energy efficiency programs focus just on efficiency programs. And now over time, people got interested in demand response, and that was another silo. Or, and then as mentioned, with the SDGs, there's health, gender, equity, all these other silos, and they're communities that build on those silos. And foundations will say, well, I'm just going to fund projects where we're looking at gender versus energy efficiency. And what we try to do is bring that together, looking at what are the role of women, for example, in the evaluation of energy efficiency. And not only the impact of energy efficiency projects on women and in communities, but how do we get more women involved in evaluation and get their views incorporated? So there's multitude of different ways of doing that. And education, of course, has an important role to play. But uh, looking on my career, a lot of what you learn, the basics are in the university, but it's really on the job. And therefore, you need to find the right group you're comfortable with in working with. Could be in the public sector, could be a government agency, or it could be in the private sector. And fortunately, again, in the US, it started out in the public sector, particularly with the US Department of Energy. But over time, because of more money being invested in energy efficiency, the private sector got involved, consulting agencies, some very small, which then grew. And then evaluation became part of that. So evaluators learned from other evaluators, and many of them started then their own companies. I know a number of them who started off small and now they've retired and handed it off to others. But so and then the last thing I want to mention for this was, um, what is it? What are the skills one needs to become an evaluator? And there really isn't one set of skills, but a multitude. So that we've talked earlier about quantitative analysis. So a statistical background is good if you're going to continue the quantitative analysis, and that could be both number crunching, either modeling or analysis, um, or interviewing. Being a good interviewer takes certain skills. Not everyone can do that. Um, and then understanding the larger social political context you're working with, and that can deal with how energy is being regarded in terms of a supply versus demand, who is who are the leaders in that? Are this the private sector or the public sector? Who are people looking towards? Those kinds of things. But you learn that on the job, and hopefully wherever you work, you have good leadership and they're willing to hear from you. So you learn the first few years, you're in a steep learning curve. And so that's how I see it.
In other words, what Ed is saying is that evaluators need both the hard skills like statistics and surveys and soft skills like interviewing and understanding the political context where they work. Maybe we use this to come back to EEAP for a moment. What would you like the listener to know more about EEAP? If they wanted to be involved, for example, how could they do it? How could they contribute to EEAP as well in the community?
Right. I guess the first thing is um, go to our website and join the mailing list, get on the mailing list to learn what's going on rather than to hear about webinars through friends or through other networks. So I encourage everyone to do that, number one. And we have lots of resources on, go to our website and we have lots of resources there, particularly on past webinars we mentioned earlier, um, links to other organizations involved in evaluation, and then notifications of upcoming webinars and workshops and conferences. Um, yeah, I would start there for people and see how interested they are. Once they're interested, we'd be happy to have them join us on either the advisory committee or steering committee. Those are our two key ones. The steering committees ask people more of their time, and I'll tell about one challenge about that, but we try to meet monthly on a Zoom call. Zoom has been great in this respect, so you don't have to get on a plane. Excuse me, you have to work around your schedule. Um, and the advisory committee, we ask questions of them periodically. It doesn't take much time, but we do appreciate the effort. The challenge, again, going back to the steering committee, is the time zones. I have the hardest because I'm in California and Pacific daylight time now, but we try to schedule things that are um, more useful for people living in the Asia Pacific region. But even then, there are diverse time zones. So for me, as an example, just to give you 9 a.m. in, say, in Bangladesh, not Bangladesh, Islamabad, where Nazir is good for him, and it's 9 p.m. my time, or 8 a.m., 8 p.m., and so on. And sometimes I can do it earlier, and it works with other people. So other than that, we would like you, if you're interested, to contact us. And at the end of this podcast, either you or Nazir will provide that information on how to do that.
Absolutely, one of us will do that. And of course, coordinating across Asia Pacific means wrestling with time zones. That is not easy for volunteers. Ed, you and I have been speaking for an hour at least, and we should probably meet again and talk more because there's a lot still to uncover. But for the time being, as this draws to a close, what messages, what thoughts do you want to share?
Thank you. I think if we take a step back, people will need to think about what's the most important issues on their plate, what they think is important, what they would like to work on in the near future, as well as the long term future. And for many of us in EEAP, the environmental issues are a key, particularly climate change. Um, and how do we try to uh, basically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as one example? And the people who are participating in this community think reducing energy use or providing renewable energy is one source or solution to addressing this. And in order to do that and convince people it's important, evaluators have a critical role to play. So I think going forward, we'd like more people in our network to do more work with our community, participate in our webinars and conferences, and spread the word to others. Because again, a lot of us work in isolation. There are people who know nothing about evaluation. They know more or heard of about energy efficiency, renewable energy. Some may know about it, but often others don't. But they're eager to learn more. And people need to explain the benefit of doing these evaluations and having them support us, particularly coming to our conferences and coming to listen to the webinars and associated activities. So I hope to see more people, and the network can be expanded that way.
Thank you, Ed, for your time today. Over this conversation, we've already touched upon so many different aspects: behaviors, incentives, how to be involved in EEAP, the value of conferences, the challenges of energy policy, so much, and so much still more to come. I hope we have a chance to speak at least one more time or many more times. Thank you again for your time.
And thank you. I agree. I look forward to speaking with you. And I hope this helps other people learn more about evaluation and EEAP.
Absolutely. And we will make sure that information about EEAP is shared right after this. So thank you so much. For our funder and evaluator listeners, this is your invitation. Join the EEAP network, participate in a webinar, support a conference, because this is how we grow the impact of energy evaluation together.